conversations. Let's have real conversations.
Get ready to stir it up.
Life events and everything in between. Let's go.
Get ready to stir it up.
No capping. If guests got you covered right up.
Get ready to stir it up. Stir it up.
Come on.
Get ready to stir it up.
Welcome to Stir It Up. Today I have Dr. Seth Asafo, psychologist, member of the Legon and American Psychologist Association, and our resident video gamer.
I like that one.
He is also a Dutch speaker. He's our counselor. He is the person who is always dropping the nuggets and the jewels, and he's the popular guest that we are afraid will start charging us for featuring on our show. And so we've put out, surveillance on his manager. We are making sure that his manager is nowhere in sight. I change my number weekly so she can't or he can't call me. Thank you for being here.
You're always welcome. A bowl of fufu is enough payment. You know how we do.
It's enough payment until it's not.
Exactly.
This is on record, though.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, thank you, Seth.
You're welcome.
Today, we talk about fear. Often, we hear children say, I'm afraid. And we go straight to, don't be afraid. Why are you afraid? Almost disregarding the emotion. The truth is, we've all experienced some kind of fear or the other at one point in time or the other in our life. You know that change in your facial expression, that sudden, you break out in a sweat, the change in your voice, the tightening in your chest, your heart rate changing and all of that. And just at the end of the day, there are all these physical signs of fear that happen. If you heard, when I was younger, when I heard the sound of my dad's horn, I would go into an immediate panic, right? And it could be just a spider or a wall gecko. My kids are terrified of spiders. Worrying about a math exam. Kids have exam anxiety. And even something as fun as a roller coaster ride could be fear-inducing for some, right?
And exciting.
And exciting for others, right? And fear can be sometimes debilitating and almost destructive sometimes, robbing us of the things that we need to thrive. The fear of appearing weak, for some, can lead us to avoiding being vulnerable or having the conversations we need to have. The fear of feeling inadequate in certain aspects of our life can result in us compensating in other ways that are not necessarily the right ways, right? It might result in you kind of being reliant on a substance, and that can lead to some kind of an addictive behavior sometimes later. Sometimes you being afraid of conflict might mean that you won't have a conversation that you need to have. Mm-hmm. And that can be detrimental to relationships or to your work and so on and so forth, or promotion at work. Being afraid of losing control can make you resist change. So your business can kind of go under because you're afraid to change the way you're doing things, right? And so on and so forth. The list is endless, right? And so normally you would chalk it down to, I'm afraid of a spider, but it's a lot of things. So I would say that adults are just as afraid as children. They're just better at hiding it. So today we're just going to unpack this and let's see where this goes.
I think it's a very solid topic, solid emotion that has to be discussed. Okay. In fact, I'd say that many of the human functions have an undergirding, like it's undergirded by some kind of worry, fear, anxiety, and we tend to box all of them together.
Okay.
So it's important that we unpack it for people to see the kind of impacts that it has. That's the only way that we can do something about it. Now, for me, as a psychologist, your ability to even recognize that you're afraid is good enough, because then it allows you to first explain the behaviors you're exhibiting, and also allows you to be able to do something about it. Many people don't acknowledge that they're afraid, and that's a problem.
Understood. So what's fear and what activates fear?
Well, you can look at fear as anything that, the emotion that we normally experience when we perceive or when we are in danger.
Okay.
Now, I'm saying perceive because your body and your mind will still react if you are perceiving the fear. So it can be happening, or you can be imagining it. Both ways, you would still react. Now, there are many situations that can push people to experience the emotion of fear. And I mean, classically is a danger. But these dangers we're looking at can be more physical, but they can also be imagined or perceptive. For instance, the fear of something may happen is usually a futuristic thing. And most of the anxieties, most of the fears we have, they are futuristic. I mean, if
They're not happening now.
in this moment as we sit here, if I were to ask you, what's your biggest worry? What's your biggest fear? What's your biggest anxiety? Most definitely is going to be about something in the future.
That's true.
It's about the next minute, the next hour, the next day, the next week, or next couple of months. So if you look at fear, in essence, a lot of fear has to do with processing rather than an actual thing happening.
Understood. And it means that it's not real. And so really, we are causing ourselves a lot of grief and anxiety about something that has not actually even happened.
Or will never happen. Or will never happen.
True.
But fear will push us to feel like it's
real.
going to happen. This is it. I mean, let's just practically look at. I want you all to just take some time and think about a time where you were worried about something happening, or you were feeling that it would happen and you can't do anything about it. And then walk yourself through it and realize it happened, and you were like, is that it? And that's the reality of what fear is in our lives.
Are there any evolutionary explanations as to why certain fears are more common than others?
Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, survival is the key about evolution, okay? And so if you look at the kinds of fears that people had in those times were for safety, fighting animals, fighting lions, protecting your territory. And what those things have done to our minds is our brains tend to react to all these fears in a more physical way than being able to process it and just say, I'm afraid.
Understood.
So the brain processes it like it's going to happen, like it is happening, and so we react to it. Now, I can't say that there's a specific kind of fear that seems to be more present than others, but I suppose that's context specific. But I can say one thing about Ghana. Ghanaians fear snakes a lot.
Water. The ocean.
When it's raining, because they fear floods. But you know, more importantly, why people fear lots of snakes? Because from our mind's perspective, snakes aren't snakes.
They're evil spirits.
They are manifestations of evil. So you see a worm, and in your mind, it's a dragon. Because of the picture of a snake that you have, and how powerful a snake is, even though it's not so. In psychology, we say that fear, anxiety makes us catastrophize. So we exaggerate what will happen, even though it may never even happen.
Understood. That's so true. Interesting. Are there any societal norms and expectations that have contributed to the development of certain fears, right? So, for example, things around your ethnicity and your heritage and so on. Are there any things that contribute to that?
For the most part, fear is a conditioned response. You are normally conditioned based on the experiences you've had or what you've observed people go through. Mm-hmm. And that's what usually pushes people to experience fear based on specific stimuli. Mm-hmm. So within our cultural context, I don't know if I can isolate something specific that I'd say that we all fear. But I can say that there are things that everybody fears as a result of a context. Now, you mentioned something about rains. So that flood that people get because of that's seasonal within our country means that people are conditioned to fear rain, although rain isn't something that we should be afraid of.
More water, so more the ocean, depending on where you are. So if you're a guy, you're not afraid of the water. But if you're from where I'm from, the other part of where I'm from, you'll be afraid
I like
of water.
that. I think that's such a good example to say that because you haven't had the experience with it, obviously you'll fear it.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right. That's fair. When people are afraid of something, are there certain thoughts that go through their mind?
It is the thought that brings
The fear.
the fear in the first place.
Okay, got it.
Now, we say that a lot of things, like when you look at from an emotion standpoint, a lot of things are neutral. The explanation you give tends to manifest the emotion that comes out of it. So let me give you this example. I'm driving and somebody cuts me off. And then I say in my head, well, he thinks he's better than me. So I feel the emotion of anger because I feel he's trying to put me down. On the other hand, if I were to make an appraisal and say, oh, they're going through, maybe they have a stomach, something, they need to use the restroom very quickly, I might actually feel pity for them.
Or he didn't look. Or
Perfectly. Yeah. So you see, the explanations would tell how you express what emotion you are feeling. Now let's bring it towards fear, okay? And say that if you don't have enough information about something, you typically have a fear or worry about it.
Yeah.
Because you're uncertain about it. And a lot of fear is embedded within uncertainty. A young man says, I like you, I want to be with you. You have a little fear or reservation. Like, is he for real? What if? So a lot of the times, the what if scenario
is what?
Is normally preempting some kind of concern, which is then explained in the mind as a fear. Understood. Or an anxiety of some sort.
Understood.
See, I tell you this funny story. So I have many friends. And we were all doing some of our adventures, and we saw a snake. And then the typical us, we were afraid because the snake is not a snake. But my other friend sees the snake, and he's not Ghanaian. And he's like, oh, lunch is served. So he's happy whilst I am feeling afraid. And my other friend also looks at it and says, it's a pet. So he's feeling...
Perspective, cultural nuance, background.
That's why I say most fears are conditioned. They are based on experiences that you have had or experiences that you've observed people have.
Yeah. Understood. Tell us a bit about phobias. So what are they? How are they birthed? Are there any psychological... mechanisms behind phobias?
Well, every fear comes from a place of learning. You come to associate something with it, and then you experience a reaction, and you interpret the reaction. That further continues that cycle. Okay. Now, whenever we talk about a phobia, we're talking about a fear about a specific thing. Could be an object, an animal, and usually the fear you have of that thing is more exaggerated than the danger that thing actually poses.
Understood.
So because the fear is excessive, it becomes a phobia. Now, phobias are very specific to things. So, for example, the fear of being in enclosed spaces you call agoraphobia. The fear of spiders, arachnophobia. And the list goes on with specific things. How do people develop phobias? They learn it consciously and unconsciously.
Okay.
Now, I work with a client who has never flown in an airplane, but has a fear of flying.
Okay.
And as we delved into it, it was a funny story. The reason he feared flying the airplane flying in an airplane was not because the plane would crash, but was because in his mind's eye, the plane had crashed. He had survived. He was on a lonely island where there are only cannibals. So that's what was holding him back.
So has it flown now?
We've gone past that phase now.
Oh, thank God.
Because you've been able to recondition his mind not to feel the same emotional arousal to that perception.
Yeah.
Now, see, the interesting thing you have to also know is the human mind is an interesting tool. And I always say that the brain's most significant blessing is also a significant curse.
Yeah.
Based on the explanations you give. And so if I'm thinking about something in a positive light, I tend to have a resultant positive reaction. If I'm thinking about it in a negative light, I tend to have the opposite. But phobias generally come because you've observed somebody go through something.
Yeah.
And we call that like vicarious learning. Or you've been through it yourself and your mind has told you, hey, this is how it always is. However, experiencing it once does not mean it always happens in that way.
Yeah.
But there's a cognitive bias that is created. And what even further fuels that bias is when you fear something, you avoid it.
That's true.
And because you avoid it, you never give yourself an opportunity to test the hypothesis. So then your brain keeps saying it is true, it is true. Every time you avoid something you fear, it becomes even more scary, or it adds on to the fear you have for it.
Interesting. So, I am 100% risk averse as a person. I don't take risks. I can count the number of times I've taken a risk. I cross my T's, I dot my I's. Before I make an investment, I'll do research upon research, right? And that's because I'm often afraid to make mistakes. I'm afraid to lose money because I feel like I don't have a lot, so whatever I have, I need to plan properly, right? I'm afraid to make a bad decision. And in some sense, I think that my fear of making bad decisions protects me to a certain extent, right? And so that doesn't mean I've not made bad decisions. I have made bad decisions, right?
Okay.
Is there a way that fear could be beneficial to us?
The emotion of fear is an adaptive emotion. It's necessary for survival. The fear of death, especially when you're not doing what you have to do. Say, for example, you decide that you're going to walk the streets in a dangerous neighborhood. Fear will tell you that, my guy,
You die.
be careful because somebody's going to rob you. And that's an adaptive thing.
Okay.
It's positive. We need fear in order to survive. Now, think about it this way. There have been experiments where they have dulled the fear component of rats' brains. And what happened to the rats was that they decided to stand up to anything. Imagine that your fear repository was dulled. Then you probably see a train and say, I can punch the train. So it might be detrimental to you if you didn't experience any fear at all. Our problem usually is when fear becomes crippling. When fear starts to interfere with your usual and daily functions so that you are taking an avoidance perspective, you're not able to do things. So now you talk about you're 100% risk averse. Now that also means that you may take a longer time to make decisions because you want to run through it over and over and over again before you do so. But there are times in which fear may push you to action for you to be safe. And if you are crippled by fear so consistently, then
indecision is also a problem.
Indecision is also a problem.
Understood.
Now, let me take you to the brain's level and explain something. The part of the human brain that we use in active decision making, planning, and making analysis is the prefrontal cortex, which is your forehead, okay? We find that when people get afraid, this part of the brain becomes impaired. So it's not functioning as it should. And that's the reason why usually when people are going through a lot of fear, they tend to make a lot more bad decisions that we call impulsive decisions. Now, it was interesting that in one of these like video game experiments, they noticed that in these fighting games or like shooting games, when the person was repeatedly pressing the button to shoot or to vanquish an enemy, this part of their brain was inactive. However, there's a small thing behind your head they call your amygdala, which is very highly specialized in fear. That's what took precedence. So it became an impulse to survive,
Right.
rather than a conscious thought. So think about it this way. When you have a usual fear and you believe that you're in danger of death, now you're going to try to just survive. And survival means doing anything possible. And not actually processing what's going on.
Interesting. So can I say that even though fear might be a negative emotion in some instances, it's also a way to keep you safe?
Perfectly. It is the chronic or excessive fear, which then becomes... So look at the emotion. Emotions have a spectrum. So if you take fear can be in a low intensity mood, like an apprehension. And then in a high intensity, fear can become panic. Understood. Or feeling terrified. And the reactions that you show in a slight apprehension is very different from what you show when you're actually panicking.
So going back to you talking about fear influencing decisions,
yes.
How does fear influence our decision-making process? Because one of the things you and I have talked about quite a lot is I can't parent out of fear, for example, right? Or, you can't have a relationship out of fear, or you can't act out of fear because that can be debilitating, right? So how does fear affect your decision-making process?
So once you're afraid, you seem to be in danger. So if you're in danger and you are parenting, you're going to transfer that danger to the children as well. Okay. And you're going to make decisions based on a perception of danger, even though it's not so. For example, working with kids, a lot of them will say, I want to go out with my friends. Mommy says no. Daddy says no. The reason mom and dad are saying no is not because they don't want them to go out, but they've gone beyond they went out and they are back home. But they went out.
And they didn't come back home.
They didn't come home. They were kidnapped. There was a rape. So you see what seems to happen in the background.
Yeah.
So parenting out of fear also means that you restrict your children from experiencing what life really is, for them to build that critical skill of self-efficacy. You can only build efficacy by doing. If you're parenting out of fear and you are restricting, which also means that sometimes you become a problem solver for your child.
Which they don't build those skills.
They don't build the skill.
They don't learn how to solve their own problems.
So in recent times, we noticed that a lot of children struggle. The least thing, they crumble. Why? They don't have problem-solving skills. Yeah. Because out of fear, we are consistently overprotecting or overparenting, which is a real thing that we're dealing with now.
Understood. Does the media influence our perception of fear?
It does.
How so?
Absolutely. Look at the depictions. When you watch, if you look at the media, the things that they depict can be on extremes. And the extremes mean that the conditioning of the fear can also be extreme. Now, for those of us who like to watch National Geographic Special, National Geographic Special was the reason why I stopped being afraid of snakes. Because it taught me a lot about snakes. It made me recognize what to look out for in determining whether this was poisonous, dangerous, how they operate, etc. In a similar light, it also made me more afraid of scorpions.
Because you learned a lot more about them.
Exactly.
And how dangerous they are.
So that is the effect of the media. That if you're watching, you're getting people talk about it, it's more likely to happen. Let's look at a reportage of a parent who talks about something bad that happened to their child. That would be one child in a million. But suddenly, it seems like it's
real and it can happen to you.
Absolutely. Because like I mentioned, fear pushes a lot of us to catastrophize or exaggerate what the reality is.
Understood. Are there people who are more prone to fear than others? And what makes them more prone to being afraid? Okay.
So I think there's a genetic component to it, and then there's a learned component, but they're all interrelated. Now, the research tells us that fear can be inherited. So, for example, if I have a parent who's extremely fearful, okay, that fear, or the way they react, or the way their brain reacts to fear, can be written into their DNA, which is transferred, which means that I'm susceptible to fear, or I have a predisposition to fear. So I may be more sensitized to fear. So things that may be easy for everybody to deal with may be a little more fearful for me. That's the first one.
Right.
The second one is, if you have parents who are generally fearful, they translate it to their children because the children observe. And because mom is so afraid, dad's so afraid, I learn to be afraid also of the things that they consider as fearful.
So you've kind of jumped the gun and talked about one of the things I was going to talk about, which was inherited fears.
Okay.
So if there was such a thing as inherited fears.
Oh, yeah, they are. And like I've spoken about them already.
Yeah.
You see, neuroscience is teaching us a lot of very interesting things about how you can write things into your DNA and translate them to your children. In addictions, for example, it's there.
There's one, yes.
Children become sensitized.
Yeah.
So they taste it and boom,
Yeah.
that's it for them.
They're prone to it.
They're more prone
They're predisposed.
to it. They already have a fertile ground.
Yeah.
So the moment you water it, it's sprouting like Jack and the beanstalk.
Yeah, absolutely. So, still on the subject of people who are more prone to fear than others, people living with ADHD, for example, would they be more prone to fear?
I'm not going to say specifically people with ADHD, but
Okay.
people who have neurodivergent brains.
Okay.
And those are sometimes people with ADHD, people on the autistic spectrum, autistic disorder spectrum.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes also, those people are the people who don't also feel any kind of fear.
Okay.
Because when it's difficult to process emotions,
They
they're
shut
not
them
able.
down.
They're not able to process that kind of emotion. But we find a lot of the research saying that neurodivergent brains tend to have a tendency for some kind of fear. Now, don't forget that people who've also been through significant traumas may also be more open to fear, not consciously, but of course their lifestyle has been danger, trauma, that a lot of things seem to be more fear-evoking than usual.
Understood. Okay. Now, is there a need? So, if you when you talk, just kind of staying a bit on people with neurodivergent brains. So, in providing support for parents of young children with neurodivergent brains, are these some of these conversations you have?
It depends if the child can. So psychologists will always answer, it depends. Is the child in a place of readiness to be able to understand it? The universal.
No, with the parents, for example.
No, parents must be conscientized that these are possibilities.
Okay.
But more importantly, is teaching them what to do. Now, a lot of the times, because we ourselves are not aware of our emotions, we're not able to translate the emotions to the children for them to be able to acknowledge. So in my clinic, there are people who come to me and the whole 1 hour, all we're doing is emotions. How would I feel if, and they're saying, and I'm matching and seeing if the emotions they are saying are congruent. Sometimes I have an emotion spreadsheet and we're working through different emotions. And I realize that our fund of expression for emotions are very limited. Sad, happy, angry. But there are so many things in the mix like optimism, frustration, which all tell us why certain behaviors will come up.
Got it. Okay. Within this thing of the different things that people are afraid of and who's more prone to fear, maybe let's narrow in a bit on things that women are afraid of, right? So are there things that and we would dare generalize, right? If you were to pick things, what would you say most women are afraid of?
I'm only going to say the things that women have come to me and said they're afraid of.
Absolutely.
I want to issue a disclaimer and say,
Please
I don't know what women are afraid of. But based on my interaction, one of the things I noticed that a lot of women are afraid of is their children. Losing their children.
Yeah.
I know that they're afraid of their own self-worth, feeling that their self-worth is being depleted.
Okay.
I know that they have fears around not being given or treated fairly. I know that they also have fears around declining of their physical attractiveness.
Okay.
And those are huge things that come my way. But if I were to put all of them in a theme, it would be fear of the unknown, fear of the future. What will happen then?
But we've established that that's what fear is anyway.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
But these are things that I have seen within my interaction.
So I agree with you of losing your child.
Not losing them just to death.
Yes, I mean even losing them
to the world.
To the world.
Yes.
That can and it's just
Or
the
the
emptiness.
safety.
It's just even the emptiness, right?
There you
Because
go.
I think that as your children grow up and they become teenagers and they need you less and less, you need to find other things that you derive your relevance from.
Perfectly.
Because suddenly you begin to feel like, I don't need to make sure you've eaten, I don't need to make sure you've had your shower, and suddenly you need to find other places to redirect your focus. So I can almost see that.
Absolutely. So you see, it's very interesting. They say that a lot of women attach more to their women. I mean, their children. So that to a point that even when their children empty the nest, they are still there. I've had to work and deal with families, and I've said some very blunt things to them to get a concept. Like I have a mother who says something like, I'm the most important person in my son's life. No. Then I say, please go and
But that's even a problem because then your child is not independent.
Go and have sex with them. And they're looking at me like, what are you talking about? I say, yes. You see, all the things that you can do for your child's wife can do same and one. Yeah. So if you're not able to have sex with your child, you should take a step back. But that's a fear of losing control.
Yeah.
A fear of feeling that you're irrelevant in your child's life.
Yeah. I think one of my personal biggest fears was my children not being independent and self-sufficient, right? Because when I look at my personal experiences, one of the things that I needed to dig deep to be independent and self-sufficient, right? So from a very young age, it was always important to get them to be able to do things for themselves. Make breakfast, clean your room, do things, right? And I'm very close to my children, and I'm attached to my children. But it was also important for them to be self-sufficient. And I can see how, even though I really wanted them to learn these things, as they were able to do them, and I lost relevance, I felt like I was losing that connection, right?
Absolutely.
But it was important for me to then. So it's almost like the concept of two opposing thoughts living in one space, right? Yeah, but it was okay because that's what I need them to be able to do. So I definitely get the point that you make.
Absolutely.
I see the point you talk about losing your beauty and your self-worth as definitely something that many women would struggle with. I think stability would definitely be one of the things that could be a struggle.
Yeah. But we can qualify stability.
Okay.
Could be financial, but most of the time it's social stability.
Tell me more.
Which is because society puts a certain pressure that seems to say that if you are not attached to someone else, you're incomplete.
So if you're not married,
exactly.
you should put it that way.
No, I want to be politically correct.
but you see, we're stirring it up. So being politically correct is not an acceptable thing over here.
And so situations like that, okay, can
Yes.
also evoke some sort of it's not that you want to do it, but the pressure is there.
Right.
And it hits you every now and then.
Yeah.
And then comes the same issue about, well, if I can't do that one,
yes,
I need to have a child.
Yeah.
But having a child out of a committed relationship is frowned on by society as well.
Yes.
So you can imagine the kind of pressure that evokes a sense of anxiety because everybody is asking you when. There's a joke about a certain young man who says that every time they went to a wedding, his uncles would be like, you are next, you are next, you are next. So he also decided every time they go to a funeral.
So they stop.
Oh, they stop.
Yes, yes, sharp. I think being seen as a bad mother is also something that a lot of women, if they're going to be honest, would be afraid of.
And
right?
the sad part is when the child goes AWOL, they always...
It's almost confirmation.
It's almost blamed on
the mother.
The mother.
Yes.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it comes to like just the fear of parenting. Safety, thriving, all of that.
I will go to men and I'll come back to women again.
Okay.
So what are things that men are most afraid of?
Men are afraid of being disrespected.
Okay.
And I tell you something interesting. In many homes, when mommy says something, especially for men who are consistently out there, trying to make it for the family, with your children, if the mother says don't do something, the men will take a diplomatic stance. Oh, but because they are afraid of, if I go full blown and it doesn't happen, then what have I done? I've been disrespected. And this is just by their children. But they're equally afraid of being disrespected by their partners.
Right.
Men are the ego around sexual performance is a big deal. So when men think about losing, and these are, like I'm saying, it's all based on things that I have experienced in the clinic. So it's not in any way a blanket statement that I say
Absolutely.
that good. Is that they fear that their performance will dip. Or they fear that their virility has been impacted. Because manhood for us is tied to performance and your ability to have a child.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have that, you're in trouble. Most men are also afraid of not being able to provide.
Okay.
Because then, well, you're a man biologically, but socially, not entirely. And those would be the top three reasons for me, just trying to put them into team. Well, also feeling like they've been taken for granted, which also then ties into feeling disrespected.
Would failing sit under not being able to provide?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would something like physically being unable to protect their family be something that's important?
That is a huge thing.
Okay.
That's a huge thing for a lot of men. And you see, I earlier talked about the fact that a man's ability to provide is being able to give safety to his family.
Got it. So that provision is both financial, safety, physical
everything.
all
So
of that.
if I'm unable to protect them from something, I take the blame. I feel like I didn't do something. That's the way
it's perceived.
Men will know. So we have these little fears over the safety of our families. Because, of course, from an evolutionary standpoint, you were responsible for the safety of your families. And as much as these things have transitioned and changed significantly, it still seems to be there.
Okay. So there's a conversation I was having, and it was around how invariably a lot of fears that a woman holds come to reality more so than the fears that a man holds. So it was the fears around her body changing. It was the fears around the pain and the sacrifice around childbirth and nurturing her children, right? It was the stability conversations, the struggles with raising her children, the struggles with the relationships that she has, right? Very often, these are things that I weight on a woman, and those are big fears. Whereas, yes, the man might experience some of the fears that he has, but the perception was that most men don't live out their fears. And I don't know how true that is.
Okay, I'll tell you something.
But maybe men are better at hiding.
Absolutely.
the fact that they're experiencing their fears. That was my theory in that conversation.
Which is the reality.
Okay.
Both men and women experience fear. But men are socialized to hide and cover these fears. For instance, when most men are going through significant fears, what they do is they engage in avoidance behaviors. So I'm going through a fear of a certain loss. I'd rather avoid it by drowning that fear in alcohol, or becoming extremely aggressive, or going out of the house and doing what I want to do. Because women tend to express it. So women are good at expressing their emotions than men. So because they tend to express it, we may say that they're experiencing it more than men. But I think it's just a gendered issue of how men and women express their emotions.
Understood. I love what you say, and I hear you. And what I want to ask is, but, and with men, does that help?
Not at all. You know, we've been on this drive of speak up. Men also have rights. Men are human beings. They have a heart, they have a brain, they have blood running through their veins. They feel exactly the same thing that women feel. In fact, one of the reasons why women outlive men is that men don't express. Women do. Now, whenever you keep emotional turmoil, disconcerting emotions locked up, what you do is like put them in a pressure cooker and let them keep boiling and boiling. And it has detrimental effects on not just your mental health, but also your physical health. But our women, they'll bring it out very quickly. And as they express, what they also do is that they calm their systems down. The expression could be in a blowout, it could be in crying. And I was explaining the other day that crying releases natural endorphins, which are painkillers. At the same time, when you cry, you are also letting out some of the stress hormones through the tears. And you're reducing stress hormones, your internal environment is what? It's calmer. How many men actually want to cry? So all these things...
Don't they hide at home and cry sometimes?
I think they do. I make time to cry every now and then. Since I found the benefits of crying, what I do is I look for a nice hymn, and then I remember a funeral I attended. And before you know, I've reflected on life, and I drop some tears, and afterwards I feel energized.
You feel better.
So for me, it's like I'm taking a prophylaxis.
I give up on you.
I will live long.
Oh dear. Anyway, let's talk about the fear of asking for what we want. I think that, and this is within the same thing where you say women are more vocal than men are. I find that a woman might be more, well, I might be wrong, but I would definitely say that I'm a lot more open about what I'm thinking and what I want. And I've learned that over time that I'm very clear. This is what I would like, right? But I also find that a lot of my male friends are not very clear. There is a lot of almost going round and round and round the circle. What is it that holds them back? Is it fear? Is it a lack of skill to communicate? What is the underlying thing?
All the variables you talk about can definitely play a role.
Yeah.
But in my experience working with men, one of the biggest things they struggle with is men have a highly logical mind. So it sometimes makes it difficult for them to look at the emotional side of things. Now, in a man's very logical and structured mind, this is it. If I have to tell you to do something before you do it, then what's the benefit? Then now you are doing it because I told you. Do you see what I mean? So it might not actually be a fear, but it's the fact that it takes the novelty away. Because when when it's novel, it makes them feel more, yeah, someone put thought into it. And it's a big deal. I mean, I asked dozens of men, but why don't you just tell her? By telling her she does it, then I told her to do it before she did it.
So it's not a fear?
It's not a fear. Okay. It is, but you can look at it
But
as...
I do think that sometimes people are afraid to ask for what they want because they're afraid that they won't get it, or they're afraid of rejection.
Absolutely.
And I say that because, and it might not be a general thing, I don't think it's everybody, but sometimes there is a...
A majority of people fear rejection because they tend to explain rejection in terms of personal flaws.
Yeah. I'm not good enough.
So the moment you say, I'm sorry, I can't do it for you, they start asking, is there something wrong with me? And they'll find something. Now, you see, the bias of the human mind is it will tell you something why it is the way it is. And the moment it does that, it narrows your perspective to also see only in terms of that negative. So you have 10 different scenarios why something is the way it is. And it makes sense. So then you come to feel it, you come to take it, or you personalize it. Now, to feel or to take yourself away from feeling such an emotion, then you avoid asking.
Understood.
But it's still anticipatory. It's still making an assumption that it could happen. I'm saying this on record. 80% of the things we worry will happen, they never happen.
Well, that's true. We've lived long enough. Well, I mean, if we've lived long enough to know that.
Unfortunately.
But we just don't realize it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, even with being highly reflective and looking at these things, in the spur of the moment, we still react because fear is a primitive emotion. And like I mentioned, because it's that primitive, it takes away the ability of that part of the mind that would do these totalist analysis to go away.
When you think about fear is not going anywhere.
At all.
Right? What are the good things we can do with fear?
You can always channel fear to learn something that makes you go away from the fear. Like I said, I learned to not fear snakes by watching a lot of National Geographic special. The moment I started to gain more knowledge about the way snakes operated, it changed the perspective for me. Fears are conditioned responses. They come from experiences you have or experiences that you've seen other people have. If you take, for example, airplanes, it's the safest form of transportation, and yet there are accidents all the time. Every once in a long while. But somebody bases the expression of, I don't want to use an airplane on one of those times when they would have used the airplane, say, 100 other times and nothing happened. So it's a very conditioned thing. We learn it both consciously and unconsciously. And the same process in unlearning fear is by learning something more adaptive. So you can learn fear and you can unlearn it based on new information.
And so let's take the phobias out, which are the extreme fears, right?
Yeah.
But in your everyday experiences and just dealing with clients, right? What are the things that they're afraid of? What are the things that people are usually afraid of, right? And let's start with that.
Okay. They're afraid of declining health.
Okay.
They are afraid that their career will be truncated at some point. They are afraid about their relationships. They are afraid about their children. They are afraid about their country. Their fears are everywhere.
And so is there like a toolkit that we are able to give out on how to I wouldn't say reset, or how to begin to think about fears?
Perfectly. It's the simplest, and it's like a gold standard. And this is what the gold standard is. When you have a fear, you have to test the fear. It's the only way you know whether it's something that you should be afraid of or
So
not.
if I'm afraid of snakes, I should go and see a snake and
Obviously, I'm not asking you to go and look for a snake. But I'm talking about the more behavioral...
I'm just messing with you.
If you look at like the more behavioral fears that we have, like parenting, relationships, there are some fears that you don't joke with, especially as an African man. They say we will not go and look in a hole to be looking for snake. No. The gods of our land are not too kind. So we don't do those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But the kind of fears that hold us back from achieving because you think it won't work well, it won't be good enough. Now, I learned this particular one when I was writing a certain article for publication. And I had this fear it wasn't perfect enough. So I spent so much time. It took me over 6 months to write the article. And guess what? I sent it over, and the comments that came were terrible. Then I learned something from the process. If I send the article, the feedback I get allows me to make it better. So now I send the article, I get all the comments, and I correct it, and I send it to another journal. I transformed it.
Yeah.
Just by looking at the positive or by transforming the way I process that particular fear. Look at this. All the time when we think about fear, we think about what if. How many times do we ever do what if in the positive?
What if it doesn't happen?
Exactly. But all the time we're doing what if.
It happens.
What if? What if? And we don't do the opposite of what if it doesn't happen. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, I've always said we are naturally negative because we're trying to protect ourselves. We are trying to look out for things that can be dangerous to us and deal with them. But when you're not careful, you get engulfed in the fear so much that you don't engage at all. And you can only know if something is fearful by testing it.
Yeah.
Of course, with precautions.
I'll challenge the thought a little bit.
Okay.
And maybe challenge is not the word. Maybe I will. So is it testing it or is it questioning it?
You're questioning it to take away what we call a confirmatory bias.
Okay.
Because like I mentioned, you have a certain bias, a cognitive bias that tells you this is what it is. Now, there is no way you can challenge that bias without testing it.
So give me, let's put a real example to it.
Okay.
I am afraid that my children will leave me.
Okay.
And I will feel alone and unhappy.
Good.
My children will leave me.
They will. Question is, what is that fear making you do now?
It's making me be clingy. It's making me be overuseful.
Good.
And all of those things.
So now you already established that they will leave regardless.
Yes.
And you are making their life a hell by being the way you are. Challenging the thought is allowing the things to flow the way it should. It puts you in a sense of discomfort for a short period of time. But then you get used to it.
But I'm asking, how do I test it?
This might not be a scenario where you can test, but it's only time that will tell. And like I said, many of the times, this fear you have is not even real.
Okay. So I agree with you, it's not real. But I guess my thought is maybe the way you get over it is to challenge the way you think about it.
Absolutely.
Right? And the point you made earlier, which is reframe the way you look at the fear, which is it's not that it will happen, it might not happen. Or if it happens, it's not the end of the world.
Yes. So, I mean, now that you even mentioned this, if you take the fear that your children may leave you, a way to challenge that thought would be, how will they leave you? And if they leave, are you saying that they're going to ignore you? Obviously not. They're going to go about their normal duties, but you're still going to be their mother. If they have a child, they're going to look up to you for what? Guidance on how to take care of the child and all of that.
I won't do that work.
However,
I'll be in Costa Rica.
you'll be grandma.
No,
and you'll be yearning to chill with your kids.
I'll be in Costa Rica. They can bring the kids to me in Costa Rica.
Well, if you are there, they will come.
Oh, yes.
So like you said, adaptively is challenging the thought. Also knowing that your thought can seem real, even though it's not. In fact, majority of the mental stresses that people experience today are all thought-based.
That's true.
They're not real.
So, there's a quote I want to read to you and then tell me what you think. It says, replace fear of the unknown with curiosity. What does that mean to you?
It says face it.
Instead
of avoiding it, face it. Curiosity is going to find out, so what is in there?
Go and test it. According to Seth and according to the unknown quote.
Exactly. I mean, when you mention this quote, there are a lot of things that comes to my mind, like from a very Christian perspective. Like the Bible has dozens and dozens of quotes on fear. Critically among them, it says, worry not about tomorrow.
Well, what you eat.
Because it says that the worries of today, they are sufficient in themselves. Do you get my point? And it goes to say that fear is a normal part of our existence. Mm-hmm. But if you tend to focus on it excessively, it deprives you
of the joy
of the present.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it makes you futuristic.
Fear robs us. Fear has an incredible way of robbing us of being able to live in the moment and enjoy the positive things that are happening to us in the moment.
Good. I'm thinking about the future, but I'm thinking about the future in terms of the resources I have in the present.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a mismatch.
Yeah.
There's no way those resources will be enough, and that's why I feel the fear. That's why I'm worried. That's why I'm anxious. But if I'm able to stay in the present you can actually do something. You have the power to control the present, but you have no power over the future.
Understood. So to wrap this up, what are the things that we need to do to navigate, to overcome, to work through fears?
I think the best thing you can do is to be reflective. And I always tell people, if you come to me for therapy, you're always going to keep a thought diary. You're going to keep some kind of journal. Now, what the journals do is that they give you a concrete reference point to look at the journey of where you've been. And this is what it does for you. You see, when you picture fear, you see one thing. But you've been through these cycles of fear for a long time. You've been going through them all your life. Except in the moment when you encounter the fear, because your brain starts to lose its ability to be to reason like it normally would, you are not able to uncover it in the same way. But if you keep a journal and it shows you, but I've been through this before, I've seen this scenario before, it allows you to relearn that the fear is not as real as you think that it is. Now, if you practice optimism, which is also putting in the mind that many of the things that will happen to you will be good rather than bad, it allows you to desensitize or move away from fear. If you consider fear also as an opportunity to learn and build resilience, because that's the reality. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It is a fact. The brain is a muscle.
You're on this resilience matter again.
I'm on it. It's a fact. The brain is a muscle. You work the muscle gets stronger. So the more you're able to overcome fear, the stronger your muscles for overcoming fear also become.
Thank you.
As usual.
I'll make you a cocktail.
Do you have soup cocktail?
There is soup cocktail.
That's better. I can tell you what is in it already.
What's in it?
It's orange.
Okay. The color orange?
Yes.
Or the fruit
Which
orange?
means there's orange in it. I lie. The airway people have already. This is called taste by Bluetooth. Cheers.
Cheers.
Orange, mango. There's orange and mango. And there's some soda-ish thing in the background, but
Stir it up.
Cheers.
It's a wrap.